Pinocchio, The Story of a Puppet by Carlo Collodi. Chapter 1. The Piece of Wood That Laughed and Cried Like a Child. Once upon a time, there lived a carpenter, Antonio, but everybody called him Master Cherry. Once he found a piece of wood in his shop, just what I needed, a nice table leg. He took an axe, but just as he was about to make the first strike, a small voice said imploringly,
"Ouch! Don't strike me!"
Master Cherry looked around the room and saw nobody. I must have imagined that little voice. He took his axe and struck the piece of wood.
It hurts!
Master Cherry was petrified. Can a piece of wood cry like a child? Maybe someone is hiding inside it. He seized the piece of wood and started beating it against the walls of the room. Then he stopped to listen. Nothing. I'm sure I've imagined the little voice. Putting the axe aside, he took his plane, but the same little voice squeaked.
Stop tickling me!
This time, poor Master Cherry fell down as if struck by lightning. Chapter 2. Master Cherry Gives the Log Away. At that moment, someone knocked on the door, and a lively old man named Geppetto entered the shop. The neighborhood kids called him Pudding because of his yellow wig that resembled a pudding made of corn, and Geppetto got mad every time he heard that name. "Hello, Master Antonio. I come to ask you for a favor." "Well, I am at your service." "I decided to make a wooden puppet that can dance, fence, and leap like an acrobat. With this puppet, I would travel around the world to earn a piece of bread. What do you think?" Then came a little voice out of nowhere.
Bravo, Pudding!
Geppetto became red and turning to the carpenter said in a fury, "Why did you insult me?" "Who insulted you?" "You called me Pudding." "No, I did not." Becoming angrier, two old men started to fight. When the fight was over, Master Antonio had Geppetto's yellow wig in his hand, and Geppetto had Carpenter's gray wig between his teeth. The two old men exchanged wigs, shook hands, and swore that they would remain friends to the end of their lives. "Well, what favor do you wish of me?" "I want a little piece of wood to make my puppet." Master Antonio immediately fetched the log that had caused him so much fear. Geppetto took it, thanked Master Antonio, and returned to his house. Chapter 3. Geppetto names his puppet Pinocchio. As soon as Geppetto reached home, he set to work to cut out his puppet. "I think I'll call him Pinocchio. That name will bring him luck." He made his puppet a hair, then a forehead, and then eyes. Imagine his astonishment when those eyes started to move. Then Geppetto carved the nose, and it began to grow immediately. The more poor Geppetto cut and shortened it, the longer the nose became. The mouth was barely completed when it began to laugh and call Geppetto names.
Ha ha!
"Be silent!" The mouth stopped laughing, but put out its tongue instead. Geppetto pretended not to notice and continued carving. After the mouth, he modeled the chin, the throat, the shoulders, the arms, and the hands. Suddenly, he felt the wig snatched from his head. He turned around and saw his wig in the puppet's hand. "You are not yet completed, but you have no respect to your father." Geppetto lifted the puppet under the arms and placed him on the floor to teach him to walk. As soon as his legs became limber, Pinocchio jumped into the street and escaped. Poor Geppetto rushed after him. The people in the street laughed to see a wooden puppet running like a racehorse. Some soldier even imagined that a colt must have escaped from his master. So he planted himself in the middle of the road, determined to stop the runaway. Pinocchio decided to pass between his legs, but failed entirely. The soldier caught him by the nose and gave him to Geppetto. The angry old man took the puppet by the collar. Soon a crowd of inquisitive people assembled. Some of them said one thing, some another. "Poor puppet! He's not wanting to return home. He knows how bad Geppetto will beat him up."
This Geppetto seems a good man, but with kids, he is a real tyrant.
So much was said that finally the soldier set Pinocchio free and arrested Geppetto instead. Poor Geppetto was not ready to defend himself, so he sobbed out only, How could I think of making this rascal a well-conducted puppet? Chapter 4. The Talking Cricket Scolds Pinocchio. While poor Geppetto was being taken to prison for no fault of his, Pinocchio returned home and closed the door. Suddenly, he saw a big cricket crawling up the wall.
Who are you?
I am the talking cricket. I have lived in this room for 100 years.
Well, now this room is mine. Go away.
Shame on those kids who rebel against their parents. They will never come to any good in the world.
Sing away, Cricket. I will run away tomorrow because if I stay, I'll be forced to study as other kids.
Poor little goose, you will grow up a perfect donkey.
Hold your tongue, you wicked cricket.
I really pity you because you're a puppet with a wooden head.
At these last words, Pinocchio jumped up in a rage and, snatching a wooden hammer, threw it at the talking cricket. Chapter 5. The Flying Egg. Night was coming, and Pinocchio, who hadn't eaten all day, began to feel a gnawing in his stomach. He began to run across the room, searching for a piece of bread, but he could find nothing.
Oh, I'm so hungry.
Just then, he saw something in the dust heap. It was a hen's egg.
How should I cook it?
He broke the eggshell, but instead of a white and the yolk, a very joyful and polite chick popped out, made a curtsy, and flew away through the open window. The poor puppet stood there, empty-handed.
If my dad was here, I would not be dying of hunger.
His stomach cried out more than ever, so he decided to ask for food in the neighborhood. Chapter 6. Pinocchio's feet burned to cinders. Pinocchio closed the house door and made a dash for the village. There, he took hold of the bell of a house and began to ring it with all his might. Soon, an old man appeared at the window. "What do you want at such an hour?"
A piece of bread.
The old peasant thought that this was one of those kids who amuse themselves by waking respectable people. "Hold out your cap." Pinocchio pulled off his cap. Just as he held it out, an enormous pan of water poured down on him. The puppet returned home like a wet chicken, sat down, and rested his damp feet on a brazier. The wood soon took fire, but Pinocchio continued to snore. He awoke only at daybreak because Geppetto was knocking on the door. Chapter 7. Geppetto gives his own breakfast to Pinocchio. Poor Pinocchio didn't know his feet were burnt off. He slipped off his stool to open the door, but fell to the floor. So Geppetto had no other choice than to get in through the window. At first he was angry, but when he saw Pinocchio lying on the ground without feet, he was overcome by emotions. "How did you manage to burn your feet?"
Oh, I don't know. I was so hungry and wanted to cook an egg. Oh, poor me.
Geppetto understood only that the puppet was dying of hunger. He took 3 pears from his pocket.
If you wish me to eat them, peel them for me.
"I never thought that you were so whimsy."
I cannot bear rind.
Geppetto peeled the 3 pears and put the rind on a corner of the table. Having eaten the first pear in 2 mouthfuls, Pinocchio was about to throw away the core, but Geppetto held his arm. "Don't throw it away. In this world, everything may be of use." And so the 3 cores were placed on the corner of the table, together with the 3 rinds.
I am as hungry as ever.
"My boy, I have nothing more to give you."
Well, I will eat the rind then.
Pinocchio quickly devoured the rinds and the cores and clapped his hands on his sides.
Ah, now I feel full.
You see, we can never be too particular in our tastes. Chapter 8. Geppetto makes Pinocchio new feet. When the puppet satisfied his hunger, he immediately began to fret because he wanted a pair of new feet. "Why should I make you new feet? To help you escape from home?"
I promise you, I will behave. I will go to school.
Geppetto's eyes filled with tears. He did not say another word, but set to work. In an hour's time, Pinocchio's feet were ready. The puppet then jumped down from the table and began to sprint around the room.
I will also need some clothes to go to school.
Geppetto, who was poor and had not so much as a penny in his pocket, made him a little dress of flowered paper, a pair of shoes from the bark of a tree, and a cap from the crumb of bread.
I still need the spelling book.
Where can we get one?
At the bookseller's.
I don't have any money. And Pinocchio also became sad, because real poverty is understood by everybody, even by kids. Suddenly, Geppetto rose to his feet, put on his old coat, and ran out of the house. He returned shortly with a spelling book for Pinocchio, but the old coat was gone. Pinocchio immediately understood what happened and threw his arms around Geppetto's neck. Chapter 9. Pinocchio goes to see a puppet show. As soon as it stopped snowing, Pinocchio set out for school. As he went along, he heard music in the distance. The sounds came from the end of a street that led to a village on the seashore. Finally, Pinocchio decided to go to school tomorrow and ran to a colorful building made of wood and canvas.
What is that building?
The Great Puppet Theater.
How much does it cost to go in?
A dime. Pinocchio lost all control of himself.
Will you give me a dime for this new spelling book?
I am a boy, and I don't buy from boys. Then a hawker of old clothes who stood near, listening to the conversation, called out to Pinocchio, "I will buy the spelling book for a dime." The book was sold there, while poor Geppetto remained at home trembling from the cold in his shirt. Chapter 10. The puppets recognize their brother Pinocchio. Pinocchio's visit to the puppet theater almost produced a revolution. All at once Harlequin, who was on the stage, stopped and exclaimed, "Pinocchio, come up here! Give a hug to your wooden brothers!" Pinocchio leapt upon the stage. At that moment, out came the showman. "Why are you stirring up trouble in my theater?"
Believe me, sir, it's not my fault.
"Silence! Tonight I will show you whose fault it is." As soon as the play was over, the showman went into the kitchen, where a fine sheep was turning slowly on the spit. There wasn't enough wood to finish roasting, so he gave his puppets an order to bring him Pinocchio. Terrified by a severe glance of their master, the puppets obeyed. Chapter 11. Fire Eater sneezes and pardons Pinocchio. The showman, whose name was Fire Eater, looked like a wicked man. However, he did not have a stone heart. When he saw poor Pinocchio crying and wriggling like an eel, he sneezed violently. "The old man has sneezed. That's a sign that he pities you." After he sneezed, the showman shouted to Pinocchio, "What a sorrow it would be for your poor old father if I threw you on burning coals. Achoo! 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 I pity you, so I will take Harlequin and throw him into the fire." Poor Harlequin's legs bent under him. At this sight, Pinocchio threw himself at the showman's feet.
No, throw me into the fire. Poor Harlequin should not die for me.
At first, Fire Eater remained as cold as ice, but little by little he began to sneeze. Then he opened his arms affectionately. "You are a good, brave boy, Pinocchio. Come here and give me a kiss." "Then the pardon is granted." "Yes, tonight I will eat my mutton half raw." At the news of the pardon, the puppets all ran to the stage and began to leap and dance merrily. Chapter 12. Pinocchio receives a present of 5 gold pieces. In the morning, Fire Eater called to Pinocchio. "What is your father's trade?"
He is a beggar.
"Here are 5 gold pieces. Take them to him with my compliments." Pinocchio was overjoyed. He thanked the showman and set out home. He had not gone far when he met a fox and a cat. The fox was lame and walked leaning on the cat, while the cat was blind, so the fox guided him. "Good day, Pinocchio."
How come you know my name?
"We know your father. We saw him yesterday at the door of his house shivering with cold."
Poor Dad. In the future, he will shiver no more.
"Why?"
Because I'm a rich man now.
And he pulled out the money and showed it to the pair. "Would you like to transform your 5 coins into 2,000?
But how?
"Oh, very easy. Come with us to the land of the owls, and your 5 coins will become 2,000 this very night."
How they could become so many?
In the land of the owls, there is a field of miracles. Dig a hole there and put 1 golden coin into it. In the morning, there will be a beautiful tree laden with gold pieces. Pinocchio immediately got excited, forgot his dad, and set out with the fox and the cat. Chapter 13. The Inn of the Red Crawfish. They walked until at last they arrived at the Inn of the Red Crawfish. There the fox said to the innkeeper, "Give us 2 good rooms. We will snatch a little sleep before we leave. Wake us up at midnight." "Yes, gentlemen." At midnight, Pinocchio was awakened by 3 violent blows on the door. It was the innkeeper.
Are my friends ready?
"Ready? Why, they left 2 hours ago."
Did they pay for the room?
"They are too educated to offer such an insult to a gentleman like you."
What a pity. Such an insult would have given me so much pleasure.
Pinocchio paid a coin and then left. Outside, it was so pitch dark that he had to walk by touch. Suddenly, he saw a little insect shining dimly.
Who are you? What do you want with me?
I am the ghost of the talking cricket. Go back and take the 4 coins to your poor father.
By tomorrow, my dad will be a gentleman, for these 4 coins will become 2,000.
Don't trust those who promise to make you rich in a day. Listen to me and go back, my boy.
No, I am determined to go on.
May heaven preserve you from dangers and robbers.
And the talking cricket vanished suddenly, like a light that had been blown out, and the road became darker than ever. Chapter 14. Pinocchio meets the robbers.
Now I am even supposed to meet with robbers, as if they would frighten me. I would just run away from them.
Pinocchio had no time to finish his speech, since at that moment leaves rustled behind him. He turned to look and saw 2 evil-looking black figures wearing charcoal sacks. Pinocchio stuck his gold pieces into his mouth and tried to escape, but an arm seized him. "Your money or your life." Pinocchio was silent because the money was in his mouth.
"Give us your money or you're dead."
The puppet made a gesture with his hands to signify, "I have none." "Give us the money or there will be trouble, and then the trouble will find your father."
No, not my poor dad.
Then the sovereigns clinked in his mouth.
"There they are. Spit it out at once."
But Pinocchio broke free from the robbers' hands and ran across the country. Brigands chased after him. Chapter 15. The robbers hang Pinocchio on the big oak. The puppet was already at the point of turning himself over. Looking around one last time, he saw a small house in the distance. After a desperate race, he arrived at the door and knocked. No one answered. At this very moment, he felt himself being seized by the collar.
"You will not escape from us again. Now will you open your mouth? Yes or no?"
Without losing any time, the robbers tied Pinocchio's arms and tied him to the branch of the big oak. They then sat down on the grass and waited. But at the end of 3 hours, the puppet's eyes were still open, his mouth closed, and he was kicking more than ever. Losing patience, the robbers walked off. Meanwhile, a northern wind began to blow and roar angrily. The poor puppet began swinging violently. Pinocchio became so exhausted that he shut his eyes, opened his mouth, and hung stiff and insensible. Chapter 16. The beautiful child rescues the puppet. A beautiful child with blue hair came to the window of the little house. When she saw the poor puppet, she was touched to her heart and gave 3 claps. At this signal, a magnificent poodle appeared.
Medoro, take my carriage and ride into the wood. Release the poor puppet that is tied to the big oak and bring him here.
The poodle barked and ran off like a racehorse. A quarter of an hour later, the carriage returned. The fairy carried Pinocchio into a little room and sent for the famous doctors, the crow, the owl, and the talking cricket.
Tell me, gentlemen, if this unfortunate puppet is alive or dead.
The crow advanced first and felt Pinocchio's pulse. The puppet is already dead. But if unfortunately he should not be dead, then he is still alive.
I think the puppet is still alive, but if he should not be alive, then he is dead.
The fairy then turned to the talking cricket.
Don't you have anything to say?
I have known this puppet for some time. He is a disobedient son who will make his poor father die of a broken heart.
Suddenly, a muffled sound of crying was heard in the room. To everybody's astonishment, the sounds came from Pinocchio. When a dead person cries, he is on the road to get well.
For me, when the dead person cries, he's just sorry for what he did.
Chapter 17. Pinocchio will not take his medicine. As the three doctors left the room, the fairy touched Pinocchio's forehead and perceived that he had a high fever. She immediately dissolved white powder in a glass of water.
Drink it and you will be well.
Pinocchio made a face.
Is it sweet or bitter? It is bitter, but it will do you good. I will not drink it. Drink it and I'll give you a piece of sugar to take away the taste. Give me the sugar first.
The fairy gave him the sugar. Pinocchio swallowed it in a second and took the glass unwillingly.
It is too bitter. I need another piece of sugar.
The fairy put another piece of sugar in his mouth and gave him the glass again.
I will not drink that bitter water. My dear, this fever will carry you into the other world in just a few hours. You are not afraid of death? No, I would rather die than drink that bitter medicine.
At that moment, the door of the room flew open and 4 black rabbits entered.
What do you want from me?
We have come to take you.
Oh, fairy, give me the glass. Be quick for pity's sake.
Pinocchio took the glass with both hands and emptied it at a gulp.
Well, this time we have made our journey in vain.
A few minutes later, Pinocchio jumped up from the bed quite well.
See, the medicine taken at the right moment could save you from grave illness. Now, tell me, how did you fall into the hands of those robbers?
Pinocchio told the fairy all that had happened to him from the very beginning.
Well, where have you put the remaining 4 pieces? I have lost them.
As soon as he told the lie, his already long nose grew 2 inches longer.
Where did you lose them? In the woods near here.
Upon the second lie, his nose kept growing.
Ah, now I remember. I swallowed them.
Upon this lie, his nose grew to such an extraordinary length that poor Pinocchio could not move in any direction. He tried to run out of the room, but his nose had grown so long that it could no longer pass through the door. Chapter 18. Pinocchio meets the fox and the cat again. The fairy gave the puppet plenty of time to cry over his nose. Then she clapped her hands and 1,000 large woodpeckers flew in. They perched on Pinocchio's nose and began to peck at it. In a few minutes, his enormous nose was reduced to its usual size.
You can stay with me if you wish, and I will be your good little sister. I would remain if not for my poor dad. Don't worry, your father will be here tonight. Can I go and meet him? Sure.
Pinocchio set out and soon reached the big oak. Suddenly, 2 persons came out on the road. Can you guess who they were? The fox and the cat, of course. Here is our dear Pinocchio. What are you doing here?
Waiting for my dad.
What about our gold pieces?
I got them in my pocket.
To think you can have 2,000 by tomorrow. Why don't you bury them in the field of miracles?
Is it far?
Less than 2 miles.
Pinocchio thought of the good fairy, of old Geppetto, and the warnings of the talking cricket, and hesitated a little, but then shook his head and said,
Let's go!
They walked for half of the day and finally reached a town that was called Trap for Blockheads. On the streets, Pinocchio saw dogs who were yawning from hunger and shorn sheep trembling with cold. They crossed the town and soon came to a solitary field. Here we are. Now dig a hole, put your gold pieces into it, fetch water, and water the ground. Pinocchio did as he was told. That's it. Now, return in 20 minutes and you will find a shrub with its branches loaded with money. The puppet was beside himself with joy. The fox and the cat wished Pinocchio a good harvest and went about their business. Chapter 19. Pinocchio is robbed of his money. The puppet returned to the town, waited 20 minutes, and then returned to the Field of Miracles. He went right up to the little hole where he had buried his coin, and found nothing. He then rushed back to the town and went at once to the courts of justice to denounce the two crooks who had robbed him. The judge was a big gorilla with a gray beard. When the puppet finished his tale, he rang a bell, and two mastiffs appeared. "The poor boy has been robbed of 4 gold pieces. Put him into prison." The puppet tried to protest, but the gendarme shut his mouth and carried him off to the cell. There he remained for 4 long months until the young prince from the town commanded that all the prisoners should be released. Chapter 20. Pinocchio starts back to the fairy's house. Pinocchio immediately took to the road that led to the fairy's house. He imagined himself hugging his father and asking forgiveness of the fairy. Suddenly he stopped, frightened to death. An immense serpent was stretched across the road. Seeing no way to walk around it, the puppet decided to jump over. Just as he was going to leap, the serpent raised himself suddenly like a spring. The puppet fell so awkwardly that his head got stuck in the mud and his legs went into the air. At the sight of the puppet kicking violently with his head in the mud, the serpent began to laugh. He laughed and laughed until he burst out. Pinocchio set off running again, but before long he felt dreadful hunger and jumped into a vinery to pick some grapes. He had scarcely reached the vines when with a loud crack, his legs were caught between 2 cutting iron bars. The puppet had stepped in a trap set on the polecats. Chapter 21. Pinocchio acts as watchdog. Suddenly, the puppet heard a soft sound of approaching steps. The owner of the field came to see if one of the polecats had been caught in his trap. The peasant was quite astonished when he saw that instead of a polecat, he had caught a boy. "Ah, little thief! It's you who steals my chickens!"
It's not me. I only came into the field to take grapes.
"The one who steals grapes is quite capable of stealing chickens." Opening the trap, the peasant seized the puppet by the collar and carried him to his house. When he reached the yard, he threw Pinocchio roughly to the ground. "You shall take the place of my dog that died today," taking a great collar with a heavy chain. He strapped it tightly round Pinocchio's throat and went into the house. Pinocchio remained on the ground, more dead than alive from the cold, hunger, and fear. Finally, he went into the dog kennel and fell asleep. Chapter 22. Pinocchio discovers the robbers. At midnight, strange voices came at the courtyard. Putting the point of his nose out of the kennel, Pinocchio saw 4 little beasts. Finally, one of them came to the kennel.
Good evening, Melampo. My name is not Melampo. I am Pinocchio. Where is Melampo, then? He died this morning. Well, then, I will offer you the same deal that we had with old Melampo. One night in every week, you will let us carry off 8 chickens. We will give 1 to you if you will not bark. Deal?
Pinocchio nodded, and the 4 polecats then jumped into the poultry. The puppet shut them in, put a large stone against the door, and began to bark. The peasant rushed into the poultry and caught the polecats. "How did you manage to discover the thieves? Even my faithful Melampo never found out anything." The puppet could inform him of the deal between the dog and the polecats, but he decided not to accuse the dead.
The polecats promised me a chicken, but I don't make deals with dishonest lot.
"Well said, my boy. Thank you. I will set you free at once." And he removed the dog collar. Chapter 23. Pinocchio flies to the seashore. Pinocchio ran to the fairy's house, but when he reached the field, where the little white house had once stood, he saw only a marble stone with words written on it. "Here lies the child with the blue hair, who died from sorrow, abandoned by her little brother Pinocchio." The puppet fell on the ground and burst into tears.
Oh, little fairy, why did you die? And my dad, Where is he?
Just then, a large pigeon flew over Puppet's head and called,
Do you know a puppet called Pinocchio?
I am Pinocchio.
The pigeon rapidly flew to the ground.
Maybe you also know Geppetto.
That's my poor dad. Is he still alive?
I left him 3 days ago on the seashore. He was building a little boat to cross the ocean. More than 3 months he's been looking for you.
How far is it from here to the shore?
More than 600 miles, but I will carry you there if you wish.
Pinocchio jumped on the pigeon's back, and the pigeon took flight. Next morning, they reached the seashore that was crowded with people who were looking out to sea. Pinocchio caught the sleeve of an old woman.
What's happening? A poor father who has lost his son has gone away in a boat to search for him. It's my dad!
Pinocchio stood on the top of a high rock and began to wave to his father. Geppetto seemed to recognize his son. He was trying to return, but the sea was so ravenous that he could not. Pinocchio then jumped into the sea and swam like a fish. Chapter 24. Pinocchio finds the fairy again. Pinocchio swam the whole night, but he could not find his dad. In the morning, he reached the shore and took the road to the village. He was already feeling hungry, having eaten nothing for 24 hours. At that moment, a man came down the road with carts full of charcoal. Pinocchio approached him and said in a low voice,
Would you give me a nickel since I am dying of hunger?
Help me to drag home these carts, and I will give you a quarter.
I have never drawn a cart.
Too bad for you. Then eat 2 slices of your pride, boy. In less than half an hour, 20 other people went by, and Pinocchio asked charity of them all. But they all answered, Go and look for a little work. Learn to earn your bread. At last, there came a woman with 2 cans of water. Pinocchio ran to her.
Will you give me some water? Drink, my boy, if you wish it.
Pinocchio drank like a fish.
Help me to carry home these 2 cans, and I will give you a fine piece of bread, a dish of cauliflower, and a candy.
The temptation was so great that Pinocchio could not resist. When they reached the house, the woman set the table immediately. Pinocchio did not eat, he devoured. When his hunger was somewhat satisfied, he raised his head to thank the little woman and gave a cry of astonishment.
You're here! Oh, little fairy, tell me that it is you, really you!
Chapter 25. Pinocchio promises the fairy to be good. At first, the good little woman was saying that she was not the little fairy with blue hair. However, she ended by revealing herself.
Do you remember? You left me a child, and now I am old enough to be your mama.
Oh, I'm so glad. I wish to have a mama like other kids. How did you manage to grow so fast? I would like to grow fast as well.
You can't grow. Puppets never grow.
Oh, I am sick of being a puppet. I want to be a human being.
And you will become one if you learn to be a good boy.
Starting from today, I will change. My father will be proud of me. Do you know where he is?
I don't, but you will find him one day, I'm sure.
Upon hearing this, Pinocchio hugged the fairy and said,
Oh, the sorrow I felt when I read, Here lies.
I know. I saw from your grief that you had a good heart. That is why I came to look for you here. I will be your mama, but you must obey me. Tomorrow you will go to school.
Pinocchio's face fell.
It seems a little too late for me to go to school.
It is never too late to learn.
Pinocchio was touched by these words.
Fine. I will study because I'm so weary of being a puppet, and I wish to be human.
All is in your hands.
Chapter 26. The Terrible Shark. The following day, Pinocchio went to school. When the pupils saw a puppet, the little rascal started to play him all sorts of tricks. But Pinocchio soon managed to earn the esteem of all the boys in the school, mostly with kicks and blows. Even the teacher praised him, since she found him intelligent. Pinocchio made many friends, but among them were several young rascals who loved mischief. The good fairy was worried.
Those bad schoolfellows of yours will make you lose all your love of study.
One day, while Pinocchio was on his way to school, he met several of his companions.
Hey, in the sea near here, a shark has appeared. Come along.
I will go and see it after school.
Do you think the fish will wait for you?
Okay, let's go. The one who runs fastest is the best.
Chapter 27. Pinocchio is arrested by the gendarmes. When Pinocchio arrived at the shore, he looked out to sea, but he saw no shark. From the boy's silly laughter, Pinocchio knew that his companions tricked him.
What is so funny?
Oh, it was real fun. We made you to miss school, for you make us appear in a bad light to the teacher. We will make you pay for it.
And one of the boys gave Pinocchio a blow with his fist. The puppet immediately returned the blow, and the fight in a moment became desperate. One of the boys seized the heavy book and, aiming at Pinocchio's head, threw it with all the force. Instead of hitting the puppet, it struck one of his companions in the temple, who turned white and fell on the sand. Thinking he was dead, the terrified boys ran off. But Pinocchio soaked his handkerchief in the sea and began to rub the temples of his poor schoolfellow.
It was not me. Oh, what should I do?
Suddenly, two soldiers approached him. "What are you doing here?"
I am helping my schoolfellow. He was wounded with a book.
"Whose book is this?"
Mine.
"Get up and come with us." The soldiers called some fishermen who were passing near the shore, ordered them to take care of the wounded boy, and took Pinocchio to the village. Then a gust of wind blew Puppet's cap off his head. The puppet ran for it and escaped towards the seashore. The soldiers, despairing to overtake him by foot, sent after him a large mastiff named Alidoro. Chapter 28. Pinocchio escapes being fried like a fish. There came a moment when Alidoro, the mastiff, had nearly caught up with Pinocchio. Fortunately, the sea was only a few steps away, and the puppet plunged into the water. Alidoro could not stop himself in time and also fell into the sea. Unfortunately, the dog could not swim. "I'm drowning! Help!" Pinocchio hesitated, but remembered that his father had often told him that a good action is never lost. He swam to Alidoro, brought him onto the dry sand, and jumped again into the water. "You have done me a great service. I will not forget your help." Pinocchio swam on until he saw among the rocks some kind of cave. As he was about to climb up onto the rocks, something carried him into the air. He found himself enclosed in a large net, together with a swarm of fish. At the same moment, a fisherman came out of the cave, drew his net out of the sea, and carried it into the cave to a large frying pan full of oil. The fisherman began throwing the fish into the bowl, saw Pinocchio, and opened his eyes in astonishment.
What is this fish? I've never tasted it.
I am a puppet.
A puppet fish? All the better. I will eat you with greater pleasure.
The fisherman bound Pinocchio's hands and feet and prepared to throw him into the frying pan. Chapter 29. Pinocchio returns to the fairy's house. Just then, a large dog jumped into the cave, attracted by the smell of fried fish.
Save me, Alidoro. Help me.
The dog recognized Pinocchio's voice, seized the puppet, and rushed out of the cave. When Alidoro had reached the path that led to the village, he put Pinocchio gently on the ground.
Thank you.
"There's no need. You saved me, and I have now returned it." Alidoro extended his right paw to the puppet, who shook it heartily, and they separated. Pinocchio set off for the fairy's house and promised that he would study and be a well-conducted boy. He kept his word for the remainder of the year. During the exams, he became first in school, and his behavior was so good that the fairy said,
Tomorrow will be a great day. You will become a boy.
The next day promised to be most happy and delightful. But Chapter 30. The Land of Fools. Pinocchio went around the village to give out invitations for yesterday's feast. In less than an hour, almost all his friends were invited. Only one boy remained, Candlewick. He was the naughtiest boy in school, so Pinocchio had some trouble finding him. At last he saw the boy.
What are you doing there?
Waiting for midnight to start my journey. I'm going to the land of sweets. Want to come too?
Me? No, never.
Think about it, Pinocchio. There are no schools there. In that delightful land, nobody ever studies.
Pinocchio was sorely tempted. Meanwhile, the night had come and it was quite dark. Suddenly they saw a small light moving in the distance and heard voices and the sound of a trumpet. Candlewick jumped to his feet.
It's the coach. Now will you come? Yes or no?
Are you sure? Absolutely sure? That in that country, kids are never obliged to study?
Never, never, never.
Let's go then.
Chapter 31. Pinocchio enjoys 5 months of happiness. At last the coach arrived. It was full of boys between 8 and 14 years old and drawn by 12 pairs of donkeys. The little coachman turned to Candlewick and said to him, smiling, I must warn you, there is no place in the coach.
No problem. If there's no place inside, we will sit outside. Are you coming, Pinocchio?
Pinocchio sighed thrice and mounted one of the donkeys. In the morning at daybreak, they arrived in the land of fools. It was a country unlike any other country. In the streets, there was such merriment, noise, and shouting that it was enough to turn anybody's head. Pinocchio and Candlewick had scarcely set foot in the town before they were in the thick of the tumult. The days had been entirely spent in play and amusement, until one morning Pinocchio awoke to a most disagreeable surprise. Chapter 32. Pinocchio turns into a donkey. The surprise was that Pinocchio's head was adorned with a magnificent pair of donkey's ears. He began to cry so loudly that a little marmot that lived on the first floor came into his room. What happened to you, my dear fellow?
I am ill.
The little marmot felt Pinocchio's pulse. You have got a very bad donkey fever. In 2 or 3 hours, you will no longer be a puppet or a boy. You will become a little donkey.
It's all Candlewick's fault. I wished to stay home, but he said to me, why should you study?
Why did you follow the advice of a false friend?
Because I am a puppet with no sense and no heart. Just you wait, Candlewick.
Pinocchio put a big cap on his head and went to Candlewick's house. Imagine Pinocchio's feelings when he saw his friend with a big cap on his head too.
Candlewick, let me see your ears.
First, I would like to see yours.
Okay, let us both take off our caps at the same moment.
The 2 boys took off their caps and discovered that they were both struck with the same misfortune. They started laughing, but suddenly Candlewick stopped and staggered. Pinocchio also could not stand upright. They both doubled up and began to run around the room on their hands and feet. Their hands became hoofs, their faces lengthened into muzzles, and their backs became covered with a gray, hairy coat. Then they wept. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door.
Open the door. I am the coachman who brought you to this country.
Chapter 33. Pinocchio is trained for the circus. Since no one rushed to the door, the little man burst it open with a kick. He took out a curry comb and combed them well, put a halter around their necks, and led them to the marketplace to sell. Indeed, buyers were plenty. Candlewick was bought by a peasant. Pinocchio was sold to the director of a circus. Either by love or by force, he had to learn to jump through hoops, to dance, and to stand upright on his hind legs. At last, a day came when his master decided to show him to the public. Pinocchio appeared in the middle of the arena to a great applause, and the director told him to show how he could kneel, trot, and gallop. While Pinocchio was galloping, the director fired off a pistol. At the shot, the little donkey pretended to be wounded and fell at the arena. As he got up, he looked up and saw a beautiful lady wearing a medallion with a portrait of a puppet in one of the boxes.
That's my portrait. That lady is the fairy.
He tried to cry,
Oh, my little fairy.
but a bray came from his throat, and all the public laughed. What was Pinocchio's despair when, looking up a second time, he saw that the fairy had disappeared. His eyes filled with tears, but nobody noticed it. The director cracked his whip and made him leap through hoops until his right leg got caught and he fell to the ground. When he got up, he was lame. The following morning, the veterinary paid Pinocchio a visit and declared that he would remain lame for life. The director then took Pinocchio to the market and sell him, so he would not eat food without earning it. A purchaser was found at once, and he took the lame donkey to the seashore. He has bought him solely for his skin that he needed to make himself a good drum. Pinocchio's leg hurt him so much that he stumbled on the narrow path and fell into the water. Chapter 34. Pinocchio is swallowed by the shark. Pinocchio's purchaser began to pull the rope that he had tied to the donkey's neck, until at last, instead of a little donkey, he saw a live puppet.
Where is the little donkey that fell into the sea?
Set me free, and I will tell you.
The man immediately untied the knot.
When I fell, the good fairy saw that I was in danger and sent a shoal of fish, who ate the donkey's skin that covered me from head to toe and reached the wood. That's how it was.
I spent money to buy you. I will take you back to the market and sell you as wood for fires.
You do that.
And Pinocchio plunged into the water and swam away from the shore. Suddenly, the horrible head of a shark rose up out of the ocean in front of him. The monster sucked the puppet like a feather. Falling into the shark's stomach, Pinocchio fainted. Coming back to his senses, he saw that he was shut up in the body of a sea monster.
Help! Help! I do not want to be digested.
Suddenly, a voice called to him in the dark.
Who do you think could save you?
Who is it?
I am Tunny. If you value your life, escape.
While having this conversation, Pinocchio saw a light in a distance. Thinking that could be some other fish that may know the way to escape, he crawled in the direction of the light. Chapter 35. A happy surprise for Pinocchio. The dim light was actually a lighted candle on the table. Seated at the table was a little old man. At his sight, Pinocchio threw his arms around the little old man's neck.
Oh, my dear father, I have found you at last. If you only knew what misfortunes have been poured over my head.
The puppet told Geppetto all about his adventures until the terrible moment on the shore when they saw each other last.
I recognized you at once.
I also recognized you then, and I would have returned to the shore, but a horrible shark swallowed me.
How long have you been shut up here?
It must be nearly 2 years ago.
How have you managed to survive?
That day, the shark swallowed also a merchant ship laden with meat and tins, biscuit, cheese, coffee, sugar, and candles. That's how I lived here for 2 years. Now there is nothing left, and this candle is the last one.
Then, dear father, there is no time to lose. We must swim away.
I don't know how to swim.
I am a good swimmer, and you can get on my shoulders. Follow me and don't be afraid.
They immediately climbed up the throat of the sea monster and began to walk on tiptoe down his tongue. Before taking the final leap, the puppet said to his father,
Get on my shoulders and put your arms tightly around my neck.
As soon as Geppetto was firmly settled on his son's shoulders, Pinocchio threw himself into the water and began to swim. Chapter 36. Pinocchio becomes a boy at last. Swimming quickly towards the shore, Pinocchio felt his father trembling as if he had a fever.
Hold on, Dad. In a few minutes we will be on shore.
Poor Pinocchio only pretended to be in good spirits. In reality, his strength was failing. Fortunately, a great fish have risen from the water nearby.
Tunny, you have come at the right moment. Please help us or we are lost.
Take hold of my tail, and I will take you to shore.
Having reached the shore, Pinocchio hugged the tunny tenderly, then took Geppetto's arm and said,
Lean on my arm, dear father, and let us go somewhere where the hosts will give us a mouthful of bread.
They had not gone 100 yards when they saw a nice little hut with a roof of tiles. They knocked, went in, but could see no one.
Where is the host of the house?
Here I am, up here.
And there he was, up on the ceiling, the big talking cricket.
Oh, it's you, my dear cricket.
Ha! Now I am dear. And what of a hammer that you threw at me?
You are right, Cricket. Throw a hammer at me, but have pity on my poor father.
I will have pity on both of you. Be my guests.
The puppet prepared a comfortable bed of straw for Geppetto. Then he asked the cricket,
Where can I find a jug of milk for my father?
3 fields off from here live a gardener called Giangio, who keeps cows.
Pinocchio ran all the way to Giangio's house. How much milk do you want?
A jug.
That's 5 cents.
I have no money.
Draw me 100 buckets of water from the well. I will give you a jug of milk.
Deal.
Giangio led Pinocchio to the kitchen garden and taught him how to draw water from the well. From that day, for more than 5 months, Pinocchio continued to get up at daybreak to draw the water and to earn the jug of milk for his father. Then he also learned to make baskets of rushes. Selling them, he was able to provide for all his daily expenses. By his diligence, Pinocchio not only supported his ill father, but also had put aside 5 pieces. One morning, he went to town to buy himself new things. All at once, he heard himself called by name and saw a big snail crawling from a hedge. Don't you remember me? I am the snail who was lady's maid to the fairy with blue hair.
Where have you left my good fairy? What is she doing? Has she forgiven me?
Poor fairy is lying in bed at the hospital. She has fallen seriously ill and has no money even to buy a mouthful of bread.
Oh, poor fairy, if I had 1,000,000, I would run and carry it to her. But I have only 5 coins. Take them and carry them at once to her. Return to this place in 2 days and I will give you some more money.
That evening, Pinocchio made 16 baskets of rushes instead of 8. Then he went to bed. While he slept, he dreamed that he saw the fairy, smiling and beautiful.
Well done, Pinocchio. Children who assist their parents in an hour of illness deserve great praise and affection.
At this moment, his dream ended and Pinocchio opened his eyes. Imagine his astonishment when he discovered that he was no longer a puppet, but had become a boy instead. Jumping out of bed, he found a new suit of clothes ready for him. He was hardly dressed when he put his hands in his pockets and pulled out a little ivory purse on which these words were written. The fairy with blue hair returns the 5 coins to her dear Pinocchio and thanks him for his good heart. He opened the purse and instead of 5, he saw 50 gold pieces. He then went and looked at himself in the mirror and he thought that it was someone else. Instead of a wooden puppet, he was greeted by an image of a boy with chestnut hair and blue eyes.
Where is my father?
He went into the next room and found old Geppetto quite well and lively. Pinocchio threw his arms around his father's neck.
Tell me, my dear father, how all this come to pass.
This is all you're doing. The children with feeling hearts bring contentment and happiness to their families.
And where is the old wooden Pinocchio?
There he is.
And Geppetto pointed to a puppet leaning against a chair. Pinocchio looked at it and said to himself with great joy,
How ridiculous I was when I was a puppet. How glad I am that I have become a little boy.